Okay, here we have our all-weather safe rooms, our tornado safe rooms, panic rooms, and safe rooms. And which can also double as a safe as well. Now, one of the first things you're going to notice that kind of makes our safe rooms different than some of the competitors is the fact that we round our corners. As you can see, you can walk all the way around the shelter, or the safe room. We'll do it in a minute. And this actually is our 6x8. This particular shelter only has 2 welds as far as pieces of steel. It's made of 2 pieces of steel, as opposed to most storm shelters are going to have at least 4 pieces of steel welded together in every corner. Our safe rooms actually have rounded corners, and that's going to add additional strength because there's only 1 piece of metal here. So that's something to keep in mind that a lot of our competitors are not doing. They're just welding in different sheets together. We'll go ahead and go on the inside. Before I do that, though, first you can kind of see the vents that we have. You can see there's vents in the bottom of the door here. And we have our Medico deadbolts, which are heavy-duty deadbolts. These particular deadbolts actually require a serial number in order to get a key. It's cut in 3 different ways, so it's a very it's very hard to duplicate this key. In fact, if you lose the key, you have to contact us so we can contact the manufacturer to get you a new key. You're actually going to get a serial number on a card registered to this particular key. Now this model here, this is our standard model, okay? It's going to be 3/16 of an inch thick. The door is actually going to be 1/4 inch thick, okay? And if you want the entire shelter to be 1/4 inch thick, then you're looking at our deluxe model. Just go ahead and add $1,000 for that, for our deluxe model. And one other thing, of course, to keep in mind, all of our safe rooms and all of our storm shelters, of course, have been tested by the Texas Tech University Wind Science and Engineering Center. And what they do is they'll actually take a 2x4 and fire it at 100 miles an hour to make sure that not only the locks, the hinges, which are covered by the wall, you can't see the hinges, they're protected by the actual wall itself, but they're heavy-duty grease hinges. And they're also going to blast it at the vent down there to make sure that if a 2x4 hits down there and it splinters, it's not going to injure anybody on the inside. They're going to fire it at different locations in the door and the walls and make sure there's no weak points, and test the weakest points of the shelter to make sure it's going to withstand, again, debris being flown around in an F5 tornado. So what we're going to do here is we're going to open the door and let you kind of see the inside of the shelter as well, and again, some of the major differences that we have. One other thing I forgot to mention as well, this is the standard model. You're going to have 1 locking deadbolt here in the center, and you're also going to have on the inside, you'll see 2 slider bolts. So there's 1 on the top and 1 on the bottom, and that's required to meet FEMA guidelines because you want to make sure that you have 3 different ways of locking the door to make sure that some debris comes and hits the door, that it's not going to break the lock, and if somehow we're able to break this lock, that it wouldn't just throw the door wide open and have debris in there and be able to suck somebody out. So that's why you want to have 3 locking mechanisms. With the standard model, we have the 1 deadbolt, and on the inside you'll see 2 slider bolts, 1 on the top, 1 on the bottom. The deluxe model, which again you pay $1,000 more for, you get 1/4 inch thick steel on the outside and the door, and you're going to get 3 locking deadbolts. So you have a lock here, and a lock there. Again, so who's going to pay the extra $1,000 to get a deluxe model? Again, both models are able to withstand an F5 tornado. The main difference is for someone who wants it more as a safe. If you're looking to kind of protect some valuables in here, if you've got some guns or weapons or precious metals, jewelry, just your documents, that you have some important documents you want to keep safe, you may be in the market for more of a deluxe model than a standard model. Because again, a thief is going to have to pick through not just the 1 lock, but 3. More often than not, they're probably going to look at your safe room and think, okay, I don't have time to sit here and try and pick through 3 locks. I'm going to move on to the next house. So if you're looking at more from a burglary or a theft point of view, you may be interested in upgrading to the deluxe model. So I'm going to go ahead and open the door, and you can kind of see that you have to exert quite a bit of force to open this door. I mean, it has good grease hinges, but I mean, it does require a lot of effort in order to kind of open this door because it's a heavy-duty door. The door alone, I believe, weighs about 350 pounds to kind of give you some perspective. I'm going to go ahead and walk in here. And one of the first things I'm going to show you here is you're going to notice, I'll step out of the way so you can kind of see a little better, is that our shelter is not just flat steel walls. You're going to see that they've got these 2-inch tubular framing support, and you can see it's not just on the walls. They're 2 feet apart in this shelter, and you've also got them on the ceiling here as well. So we have these are 2-inch tubes to provide additional strength and rigidity. With this additional framing in place, you can see it's welded as well in various different points all the way through this entire shelter. So it's a very safe, very sturdy shelter, very strong shelter. And what this is going to do for you is if you happen to be in an F5 tornado and you have those winds, you know, circling around, and you've got debris being blasted at you, which is simulated with those the impact testing model. If you had a 2x4, for example, which is a very common piece of debris to be flown around, one of the most common pieces of debris to be flown around, some of the most destructive as well, because it's such a solid, strong piece, and when it gets that energy behind it, then that small imprint that it makes can really do some significant damage and breaks through a lot of homes and a lot of shelters that are not designed to withstand them. Unlike the all-weather safe room, which is designed to withstand debris impact from 2x4s and things like that in an F5 tornado. So on one of our competitors' shelters, if it were to hit like the very center of the wall, which is going to be one of the weakest places in the safe room, you could have a deflection up to several inches worth, where the wall would bounce in and bounce out. Well, if you're leaning up against that wall, it could totally just knock you against the other side of the wall and really cause some damage, some basically implosion. That's why we have this tubular framing in here, which even at the weakest point, which would be right in the very center of the wall, if a 2x4 hit here in an F5 tornado, it might inflict maybe 3/4 of an inch at the most. So it's two inches out, so even if you're pretty close to it, it's not going to hurt you, it's not going to hit you. So it's a huge difference there having this tubular support in place. In fact, with the tests show that if the 2x4 did hit on the outside of this tubular frame, all it's going to do is scratch the paint. It's not even going to make any kind of indentation whatsoever. So the weakest point will be right here in the center. It's only going to inflect in at the most 3/4 of an inch because of this solid tubular framing. So you're going to be very safe in a storm shelter regardless of whatever happens. Another thing that you want to keep in mind, this door opens inward. Now it's very important because a lot of these are designed to be installed inside your garage, and if that's the case, of course, and your garage is going to collapse, well, it's going to collapse around you. You don't want to have your door only opening outward, because then, of course, debris, any kind of debris at all that blocks your entrance, with this heavy of a door, you're not going to be able to get out. But having the door opening inwards, of course, you can have debris all against the outside of the shelter, but as you open the door, you'll be able to just get out and climb right on out. Here's another major difference of our shelter versus our safe room versus our competitors, is the height. Our shelters, as you will be able to see here, are some of the highest in the industry. I'm showing here 79 inches, so from the very bottom to the very top, you're looking pretty close to 80 inches tall, which is a very, very high safe room. It's going to give you that much more strength, that much more metal, and you can just see it's that much easier to get in and out of. You've got plenty of access here, even for a very tall person, to get into your shelter without hitting your head or injuring yourself. Right here, I'm going to show you in the very back of the shelter is the other vent. So there's two vents. You've got one down there in the bottom of the door, which I showed you earlier, and this particular vent, which you can kind of see the air comes in through here, through the back. You've got the vents on the top, but you have this metal protection thing here in case some debris were to fall on the top. It's not going to come through here and hit you or harm you, but you'll still be able to get the air to pass through this vent here all the way around. Again, this shelter is going to meet or exceed all FEMA guidelines. And one of the next things I want to talk to you about is how we install these shelters. As you can kind of see from these holes down here, these holes are placed, you can kind of see at the most, they're 16 inches apart. And even closer, they're only 9 inches apart here on this particular shelter. So it's a little bit overkill. We put in more bolts than actually are required to keep this shelter installed. But each of the bolts that we use is a Hilti system bolt. And these bolts, they're 5/8 inch bolts, and they're able to withstand 13,800 pounds of shear force. And you can imagine with all these different bolts in the ground, you just multiply that out. I've counted there's 25 holes for bolts in this particular shelter. 25 bolts would be the equivalent of approximately 300,000 pounds of shear force. So again, 25 times 13,800, you're going to come out to pretty close to 300,000 pounds of shear force. Now, to kind of give you some perspective on what that means, if you were to take a car and drop it, from way up, several hundred feet up in the air, that car dropping on top of the shelter is equivalent to the force of about 30,000 pounds of shear force. And we're talking 300,000 pounds of shear force. And even unless you had somebody driving at the shelter at full speed, you're not going to be able to replicate that same type of an impact. The winds in the air, they can only propel a 2x4 at most 100 miles an hour in a F5 tornado. So that's to kind of give you some perspective there. Something that small can only get up to a speed of about 100 miles an hour. Or as a big car, if you're worried about a car trying to come in and break you off of this shelter, you may have seen cars being thrown up in the air, but they're not moving at 100 miles an hour. They're barely being picked up and barely being moved around. So the impact of that against the shelter, again, you're going to have the gravity pulling it down. It's only going to have a little bit of mile per hour going towards the shelter. The shear force impact is not going to be very great. So 300,000 pounds of shear force for this large of a shelter is way overkill, but again, we'd rather have you be safe than sorry. Another common question that I get is, well, what kind of a concrete do you have to have in order to install a safe room? Again, these are designed to be installed inside of a garage, so you're talking about just your average garage is going to have about 4 inches worth of concrete, and that's all that's required for these shelters to stay anchored into the ground and be safe. And in fact, they're probably going to be stronger than actually your concrete itself. You can actually have 4 times the weight of this shelter piled up on top of this safe room, and it's not even going to bend it whatsoever. You may the concrete underneath it, so the concrete is going to break before the actual shelter is going to break itself. But now what if you didn't have some space in your garage and you wanted to install a safe room on your property? What would you do? Well, first of all, they're not designed to be installed out in the elements, so you wouldn't want to have a safe room just, off your back porch, for example, without a roof or some kind of a covering to it. So if you do want to do something like that, what you need to keep in mind is you want to pour the concrete so it's at least 4 inches thick, maybe even thicker if it's poured just for the safe room, and you have to have at least